TNKR Media.
Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business, presented by FL Montreal. As always, Dan Delmar and Mike Newton with you. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Today, I'm really excited to speak to an entrepreneur whose business has made the news in recent years. They are the Quebec sort of competitor to Uber, DoorDash, and other big rideshare and delivery conglomerates. Eva Co-op is our profile today, and we'll be speaking with co-founder Dardan Isufi. So really exciting to see a local tech solution to what has really been a behemoth and something very controversial that does take, some of these companies take a lot of tax dollars out of Quebec.
Yeah, I think a lot of these companies, not only taking the tax dollars out, have created an awful lot of stir in terms of how things get taxed and how things are addressed. And, it's an interesting angle to say that, this is a tech play, Eva, on a co-op, which is a really old basis of doing business, in the community within Quebec. So it's a very interesting melding of old and new in a new world problem.
Mm-hmm. Co-op with a social mission. Very interesting to explore those themes. And Peter Joseph Moreda's tax partner at FL, by the way, stopping in later in the show to explain the co-op model. So if you're interested, if you've been thinking about this for perhaps your business, he'll enlighten you as to the implications there. As usual, though, let's start, Mike, with our thought leadership segment. News and notes, and certainly someone who's not interested in co-ops would be Mark Cuban, the shark investor and billionaire. And these are his pieces of advice for the dumbest things entrepreneurs do. So I'll run through the list really quickly, and you tell me your thoughts, or at least a couple of them. Not understanding business basics, thinking competition equals validation, and pegging your success on a one-star employee. What are your thoughts on Mr. Cuban's basics there?
Well, opinion on Mark Cuban aside, the interesting component of all of this is, you're talking about some pretty basic understandings of entrepreneurial side of things, not understanding basic businesses. We've had a few guests on in the past little while who, you wouldn't think understood business basics given the style or where they came from or the type of businesses they were running. And I'm always fascinated to find out that, the successful entrepreneurs get it. And, they understand that they need cash flows, they need projections, they need to have a strategic plan, they need to see what the implications are in the community. So, understanding the basics about having, and it doesn't mean having a business degree by any stretch, right? It's having some kind of input and understanding of how a business runs and what the implications are. And not, I've used the term before, navel gazing that, hey, I've got the greatest idea here, and no matter what happens, it's going to work. Because we've seen really successful products fail and some really questionable products succeed based on people's ability to understand business. From a competition standpoint, I mean, there was a book, Red Ocean, Blue Ocean, and I don't know if you've ever had a chance to read it. It's kind of fascinating in the discussion, in the sense that, that when I'm talking about competition, people think that because somebody's come in to compete with them, that validates the business model they have, or validates the product. And if you read, Red Ocean, Blue Ocean, you basically see that once you're in Red Ocean, and this is, I'll tie this into the Mark Cuban shark thought. Red Ocean is exactly what it sounds like. It means there's a lot of people fighting over the same pie, and there's a lot of blood in the ocean. Whereas if you can move away constantly into Blue Ocean, what you're doing is you're finding yourself standing all alone with a product. So just because somebody has a similar product or a similar service, one of the big boys comes to town, and our guest today is a perfect example that, Uber coming to town or Eva competing with Uber doesn't validate what they're doing. They still need to understand that they've got a business to run and provide something other. And I think that's what we'll see from our guest today, is they're providing a very different twist on an existing technology.
Indeed, and when you're up against a competitor that's that ubiquitous, I mean, you have to have a solid business model and something else, something that they are not offering. So looking forward to see what our guest has in that respect.
Yeah, the David and Goliath strategy is not necessarily a good business one, where you can walk around and saying, well, buy from me because I'm a small guy and I'm local. That doesn't necessarily work. There's got to be a lot more to the offering than that.
This in the New York Times. Do you know who that worker you just hired really is? Especially when people are hiring remotely, that could be something. Obviously, a lot of dishonesty, a lot of fakery can happen in a virtual or remote setting. And any interesting stories you've heard over the past few months of people not quite getting the worker they expected?
This is one of those stories where you have to change the names to protect the not so innocent. No, the reality is, I think we've always dealt with this from an employment perspective, and everybody was always taught at the end of the day to embellish a little bit, and somewhere between embellishing a little bit and flat out lying is really the employer's job when they're going through the CV to try and validate not only when they're initially looking at it, but when you have that opportunity to meet somebody. Those are those areas that you really got to kind of focus on, is trying to find, even if it's remote and you're doing it over your computer screen, those things that you question that maybe seem a little bit too good to be true. You've got to find a way to work that into an interview or into a question to make sure that you're getting the reality. I mean, we were taught, let's face it, the article talks about, when grandma came over with a sweater you didn't like, and mom and dad always told you to say, oh, that's a great sweater. And, we've taught people to lie their way because there's money on the table. Well, it's no different when it comes time to a job interview, especially in a world right now where, yes, there's a big battle for proper talent. But at the end of the day, if you don't happen to have the skills of everybody else, lying is probably not the best way to go, and you need to find a different way. And whether that's personality, I've said for years that most young university graduates have been schooled so well on passing an interview that the interview itself is almost, today, I don't want to say it's a useless process, but it is a very skeptical part of the employment exercise, because they've learned how to play that game to the nth degree.
That's interesting. And is it necessary to throw some curveballs into interviews? What are you advising people to sort of get at that deeper truth?
Well, I think the one thing, and it's a very hard thing to do, is I'm always big on body language and understanding where somebody's coming from and that exercise. But like anybody else, that sense of desperation in a potential employee's eyes or their mannerisms leaves you to question whether there is some fishy behavior going on behind the scenes. Right now, with job openings high and unemployment low, many companies are scrambling to find talent. So they're not doing their due diligence the same way they normally would when they had a throng of opportunities in front of them going, hey, I'm going to pick the best one and I'm going to fish my way through the exercise. So I think from an employee's perspective, that it's a skeptical market right now. And as much as that's easy to say, when you're scrambling for staff, you still have to make sure that you're spending that time and effort on your due dil, and maybe focus even more so today on interpersonal skills and the person on the other side of the microphone or the other side of your office, and a little bit less on the university degree and the CV in front of you.
And lastly, Mike, skills-based hiring is on the rise. What does this mean exactly? So we're not talking about, obviously, qualifications, but other skills that may not be formally credentialed?
Yeah, it's a push away from university degrees or post-grad degrees into skill set individuals. So somebody in a tech world where you would normally say, hey, I'm only going to hire an employee if they have a university degree in programming. People are really looking for those people that have experience now in programming, and it doesn't have to be that exact degree or no degree at all. And it's providing a very interesting, the whole COVID environment has really had us rethink education and where it's going. We've all known for years at one point, when you grew up in the 50s and 60s, if you didn't have a high school degree, you never got hired. Well, then you didn't have a university degree, you never got hired. And then you never got a master's degree and you didn't get hired. Well, there seems to be a push going backwards now to skill sets, trade schools, and an environment that is very different. You want to go enlighten your brain, go to university, but if you want to get a job, maybe that skill set environment. And there's a lot of kids in their late 20s and late teens into their 25s and 26s are rethinking whether they want to go the school route or whether they want to go to a trade route. And I think a lot of employees are really starting to look for skills much more so than just the CVs.
Including in the tech space. And if you can code, you can perhaps create something as revolutionary as Eva Co-op. And our profile today is Dardan Isufi, the co-founder of Eva. Dardan, welcome.
Hey, nice to be here. How are you?
Excellent. How are you?
Good as usual.
Excellent. So, my very first question to you, I got a good chuckle out of this, is, how does the University of Laval software engineering student and a poli-sci student from McGill start and build a company after having met during an internship in Saskatchewan? Sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke. So maybe give us a little bit of feed as to how this all got started.
Well, yeah, essentially, Raphael Godreau from Laval University and myself were good friends. We met back in, I think, 2014 or 15 in Saskatchewan, in Regina, while we were there for an English learning program. And we were two people motivated by all the transformations that were occurring in our societies. And back in 2017, if you remember, Uber was negotiating with the Quebec government in regards to all the taxi license and whatnot, and should the Uber drivers get a specific training to drive. And at some point, Uber mentioned that they wanted to leave the province of Quebec. And we saw this as being, well, something that was illegitimate. And also that we were seeing all of these fundamental transformations with the digitalization of the economy and the service delivery. And then we asked ourselves how to rethink these manifestations of the new economies. Uber was referring to itself as being this new sharing economy, but then it wasn't really sharing economy if you look to what drivers were getting at the end of the day. So back in 2017, my good friend Raphael and myself were, exchanging on Facebook or something, and we were like, well, if Uber is leaving Quebec, let's start a new Uber. That was the initial thought. And that night, I took my car and I drove to Quebec City. I just at the time I was working at the Royal Montreal Regiment as an infantry military officer. And I just called my sergeant, asking for permission to leave for the weekend. And we met at, McDonald's at like 3 a.m. And we started thinking of how we can replace Uber by building a more sustainable model that will actually empower the drivers, because drivers, they sit at the core of the rideshare and now delivery business. And we've seen with the pandemic, these are essential workers. These people provide essential service on a daily basis. So how can we build an ecosystem that actually empowers them and helps them while serving the community? So this is how this whole entire EVA thing started a couple of years ago.
Fascinating beginning. So maybe let's just go back to the bare bones here. What exactly did you start as? I mean, we talked about ride sharing. We've talked about a mobility platform. What exactly does EVA do?
Well, essentially, EVA is a mobility platform, both for rideshare and delivery. In Quebec, we're organized as a co-op, bringing together more than 60,000 rider members and nearly 4,000 driver members, crisscrossing the streets of Montreal, Quebec City, Saguenay, Mont-Tremblant, and now we're launching and we're expanding into other markets. Essentially, it's on the one end an app for getting from point A to point C with a stop at point B, let's say. On the other hand, with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's a delivery service that integrates with any transactional website, online ordering website, to deliver goods for restaurants and retailers. By doing both rideshare and delivery, EVA places itself as a key mobility factor in the province of Quebec. And what's great about the app is that it's entirely based on a decentralized protocol or a blockchain, allowing public access to the database while having inherent encryption of all nominal data to enable us to scale up across different markets. Our goal at say EVA as a movement in Quebec, where we started, our goal is essentially to improve the lives of our members, especially driver members, with local, with social and responsible mobility. For rider members, these are cheaper prices, so there's no surge pricing and all these prices variations. And for drivers, is better revenue. At the end of the day, we're making sure through various programs that drivers get a fair revenue and a sustainable revenue, especially with the gas price increasing and everything.
So, I mean, the setup of a co-op is certainly nothing foreign to Quebec. I mean, a large part of our province was initially built on co-ops, and whether that was food services, animal services, banking. I mean, the co-op has been kind of the core to the Quebec economy for a very long time. You're playing on, I guess, an old model, but maybe explain how that benefits people. Not everybody really understands what the co-op does, not only for the members, but what that means at the end of a year, or at the end of a period.
Well, first thing that I think we need to clarify, a co-op is a company. A lot of people think that co-ops are some sort of non-profits. I mean, we are for profit. We want to make profits so that all the members benefit from these surplus. So through our model of built-in governance, what we're looking to do is redefining the gig economy with this new social contract we're building with both rider members and driver members. Essentially, a co-op enables every member within that company to have access to governance. Every member has a voting power. And this is powerful. This changes everything. It's a simple but profound difference that we're providing to especially driver members. We're enabling them to have a direct decision-making power on every aspect of the business, be like the policies, the budget, the new features in the app and whatnot. So really, it's essentially a traditional company, but with all the users having a voting power. This is a co-op. And to us, this is powerful. And Eva, as a company, we're essentially franchising our technologies of rideshare and delivery to co-ops. Could be also like local taxi companies, could be local delivery companies. But our goal is to always at our core, foster and promote sustainable and socially responsible relationships between drivers, riders, and local businesses. And that's, I think, our biggest strength. This is how, over the last year, with the advent of our delivery services, we were able to gather like 1,500 restaurants and retailers in Montreal. So if you look at the greatest restaurants in Montreal right now, if you order through their own online ordering website to support them, well, most of them, as of now, are delivered by Eva. And this is tremendous. And we're really proud of this. And this network has also been built with various partnerships with different local companies. So if you take local companies like, Check Please Sunday, Resto Loco, Peasley, and all these other online ordering platforms like You Eat, we're integrating our software to these platforms, enabling restaurants to do commission-free deliveries. So it's, instead of like taking them 30% or 20%. So really, we want to make sure that all actors involved in our ecosystem are fairly treated. And this is, our cooperative ecosystem.
One thing you mentioned, the social contract, and that I think is an interesting point, because so many of your competitors, the multinational ride sharing or mobility platforms, pretty much are projecting that automation is the way to go in the future, right? That there are going to be drones and vehicles delivering stuff, and humans are sort of a bump in the road to that future. What is your take on the automation question, and will humans always be in the loop for you?
Well, of course, this is something that will arrive at some point. And I think this is great. I mean, this brings a lot of great challenges and also a lot of great questions, like should we tax the robots, and how we as a society should deal with all these new algorithms and whatnot. But it's not happening in the next 5 years. I mean, look at the roads in Montreal. I don't want to be like criticizing them, but like I cannot imagine having like all self-driving cars driving around this. I mean, they'll get lost and with the weather and whatnot. So we still have like years ahead of us, and we cannot just base a model based with like a predatory model and trying to take as much as we can from workers, drivers. I mean, maybe in 25 years from now, there's going to be like more self-driving cars, and this is really exciting. And this is part of the reason why we, since day one, we've established ourselves on a blockchain-based technology, because we want to be sure that we have the safest method of sharing data and connecting to other platforms. But I think the bet that many companies did 10 years ago was like, hey, by 2020, all cars will be, autonomous, and everybody will get delivered by drones and stuff like this. But we're not there yet. And it's going to take a while before we get there. This is really exciting. Again, we have a lot of challenges. What we are trying to improve here is the working conditions of those providing the ride sharing delivery services, the gig workers. And then maybe in 10 years, we can meet again in a different podcast and discuss about automation. But right now, it's not there yet, especially like with all the factors of considerations that we need to think about. But it is exciting. It is exciting, and we're looking forward to it. And also to have we also need to imagine what is a fair transition from a traditional model to an automated model.
So, Dan, I'm looking forward to asking Peter at the end of our session, how he wants to tax a robot. I think that's a fascinating concept that, we're going to have to deal with. But I think Pete's okay. He's got probably a few weeks before he has to worry about that one. Dardan, I find it fascinating that, again, this is a play on a relatively, basic non-tech play on the rideshare or, the taxi delivery service, which really, the more I listen to you and the more I read, is really a really heavy tech play. And I think that from your governance to, as you mentioned, data privacy and everything else and blockchain, there is a significant amount of tech behind this. And, if somebody was to ask you tomorrow, are you a rideshare service or are you a technology play? What would you answer that?
So the way we've structured EVA, as I mentioned, so EVA is a kind of a two-layered movement. On the first layer, we have the tech company. We're building this blockchain-powered ride-sharing delivery technology. On the other layer, we have what we refer to as the social franchises, which are the entities operating the technology. So in Quebec, for instance, we have Montreal. So we have our head office in Montreal building and developing this technology. And in the same province, we have the operator, which is the co-op in Quebec, which is essentially operating this technology, which is implementing this technology in a given market. So at first, I'd say we're a tech company trying to build, being part of the Web3 wave of thinking and building a technology that's more open and that treats human fairly. And on the other hand, of course, we're a mobility company without any doubt. I mean, we're transporting the most precious thing. We're transporting humans all across the city, and this is, I think, one thing that really makes me proud when I see EVA stickers. When I'm driving, I still have a car, but when I'm driving around and I see EVA stickers, or myself when I drive riders around, I'm super excited every time. It's a software used by thousands of people in Montreal, and this is tremendous for us.
We're chatting with Dardan Isufi. He's the co-founder of EVA. It is, a lot of things. It's a mobility app, it's a delivery app and ride sharing, and it's also a co-op. So we're exploring that interesting model as well. And coming up later in the show, we'll be speaking with PJ Moretus, tax partner at FL, about co-op models, how they work, what it implies for taxes, and how they're organized. So that's all on the way. But first, Dardan, in terms of your future with sort of in Quebec's business ecosystem, in recent years, there have been a lot of issues with the big ones, the big multinationals, and a lot of competition between government. I'm sure you've spoken to many governments around Quebec, especially, that are thrilled with your presence because a lot of this ride-sharing money is going right outside of Quebec into foreign accounts. And your presence is probably a really positive sign that our tech environment can sustain this sort of cooperative model. What has been your experience dealing with governments, and how have they reacted to EVA?
Well, pretty well, to be honest, and I guess we're lucky. But both, the federal government or the provincial government, or even the municipal government, have been pretty and are still pretty open about our case. I mean, I think they realize that these fundamental phenomena of the Uberization of the economy are inevitable, going beyond the borders of Montreal. And we must not fool ourselves. We must stand up because the corollary of innovation is the disruptions to which we must adapt. And I think EVA is the result of this adaptation process. And we're bringing a change to this Uberization of the economy by mutualization, by forming a more sustainable and fair way to work things around. And what we really wanted to apply early on was the true principles of the sharing economy, and how we can, with the digital tools, facilitate and multiply transactions between riders, drivers, businesses like retailers and restaurants, and operate a change of scale by making any service available to anyone, anywhere. So we, like, governments have been pretty receptive, and we have good allies in the three pillars of governments: municipal and provincial and federal. So far, it has been really great. And we've noticed this because a couple of years ago, before COVID, we used to travel a lot, and we met with different mayors and city administrators. And then when we were asking them, what are your main challenges or issues? And the same answer kept coming back, was like Uber and Airbnb. And then we realized that with Ava, we're kind of solving one of these, this big headache that was how to cope with Uber. It's a company that wasn't listening to any regulation, that was ditching the taxi industry. So how to cope with Uber? And then Ava just arrived, and we were doing it, and we did it, and we're doing it right now, and it is possible. It is possible to have a fair alternative, and that's it.
So a lot of positive feedback from the government. So explain to me why, to this day, ride shares like Ava are still not allowed to use the taxi and bus lanes from downtown Montreal to the airport.
I don't have the reason, because I cannot understand it myself. To be honest, this is a pretty unfair situation right now. We're in talk with the Bureau du Taxi de Montréal, and also the Transport Commission of Quebec and the Transport Minister of Quebec, because since the new regulation around a rideshare and taxi, both taxi drivers and, let's say, Uber and Ava drivers are at the same level. We're paying the same fees, and we're paying all the same trainings. We're going through the same process. So we think it's unfair to block this, I'd say, privilege. And when we think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and optimizing transportation, it's part of the solution. We need to incentivize people to carpool and to ride share. And I think taxi lanes on the highway should also be accessible to Ava drivers. We're working on it. Also, our driver members are putting a lot of pressure on us to actually take action. So it's a work in progress.
Right. So I figured that would touch a nerve. So I figured that was a good point. So you've been talking since the beginning about the technology base, the governance model, the co-op method. I mean, this sounds to me like there is a much bigger opportunity in this world than just staying within the borders of Quebec and growing within Quebec. What are your plans to grow, and how do you take the technology and the infrastructure that you've created and multiply that out, whether it's across Canada or elsewhere?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that's a big challenge we faced early on. So how to keep our movement local, but are also scaling it up globally. And we came up with this idea of socially franchising Ava. So we took as an example McDonald's, which is franchising its restaurant, its menu through various franchisees across the world. But we wanted to do the same in a socially responsible manner. So we're actually in the process of launching in Toronto and in Calgary, so in the Alberta market and also Ontario market, with the idea of franchising our software, and enable drivers there, and also retailers, restaurants, and community to benefit from another mobility service. Because at the end of the day, when you consider all the transportation issues, I mean, the only solution is the multiplicity of alternatives, and we're one of them. We're only one alternative. I mean, Uber can be great, Lyft can be great, and Bixi is great, the STM is great, And Eva is great. I mean, it's just another option that Montrealers have to move from point A to point B or to get things delivered. So we're working right now to franchise our model, and also across the globe. I mean, there's no limits. It's only a question of will.
So I guess the question is as you look to franchise, are you looking to franchise the philosophical approach to what has made Eva, the co-op, the governance model, and everything else, or would you be looking at franchising the technology and the platform? Because I'm not sure everybody gets the co-op model as well as we do, certainly in Quebec.
Well, in the process of scaling up and going into other markets, we're essentially franchising the technology. This technology can be franchised to a local taxi company, a local delivery company, or also a co-op. So we're not limited to co-ops, although we believe that the cooperative way is a great way to handle this very specific business, because it comes naturally to just bring people together and empower them with within the governance. But it's not limited to co-ops. Our goal is really to have just add a better and a more fair alternative to traditional ride sharing.
All right, Dardan Isufi, you're going to hang around. We're going to have your one piece of advice for today's Entrepreneur Please in a few minutes. But first, we turn to our tax expert, Peter Joseph Moretus. He is the tax partner at FL Montreal, here to talk about co-ops and their implications for your business model. Peter, what are your thoughts on co-ops?
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be on, actually, with Eva. A lot of times we think of co-ops and we think of smaller organizations or very large ones, like even Desjardins or other agricultural. From the tax angle is that despite the fact that their goal is not to necessarily have huge profits and pay it to the shareholders, they do have a goal to be profitable and successful. It's just that it's the sharing of it is more based on the membership or on the usage or their suppliers. So because they have that, the fact that they're not a non-profit, they do have to pay taxes, and they'll generally file for corporate taxes. And one of the differences is because of their governance is that they're able to either redistribute through anybody who's seen a Desjardins statement sees a ristourne or what we call a patronage dividend, which they're able to deduct on their returns. So it's generally, when we think of dividends or returns, it's treated differently from tax purposes, but for co-ops, it's treated as if it's an expense. And also I was thinking from the entrepreneur, generally we always thought of your own private business, grow it and maybe have an expansion and growth. But I think with today's environment, this is something that's going to be, as much as before it was done for different reasons, whether it's banking or agriculture or different industries, I could see it's something where, because of things like blockchain, where people can raise capital through crowdfunding or through members themselves, I could see this being something for entrepreneurs that have a more social aspect and want to really care for their customer base or their employees. Something that we'll see a lot more in the future. And like I was saying, from a tax perspective, they're a company just like any other. It's funny to hear Dardan kind of mention that one of the reasons for the creation of this was his comparison to Uber and its tax issues with sales taxes and how it was treating its drivers, maybe from a self-employed or employee. And this is the same thing for the co-ops will have to live with.
It's an interesting question, though, Pete, because you look at, like I said, you go back to the whole basis of co-op, which was very much founded in a community-based initiative. And when you listen to Dardan talk, as well, it's a community-based initiative at the end of the day. The government, as you're saying, is taxing them the same as they would at a corporate level. Has there been any talk at all? I mean, obviously, if you go back to taxation of co-ops way back when they started, you would have been talking about the church and various different ways. But have there been any talks about treating co-ops differently? And what are the effects on the individual who happens to be a member, or is there any effect on an individual?
So there's been talks, or there's been changes in legislations that have allowed certain co-ops to be eligible for, let's say, the small business deduction, which is a very low corporate tax rate. Right now, it's like in the 12%, 15%. So a co-op could make a decision not to redistribute all of its profit because it can pay off debt, let's say, which lowers profit for the members in the future. But there hasn't been anything specific in terms of like not taxing them necessarily if their goal is for profit. And then in terms of the members, I really think that depends what their use is. If you're a driver and you're getting a rebate based on an add-on based on the volume that you've done, that will probably you'll be taxed on that just like any other type of payment from EVA or from other co-ops. And as a customer base, it's just a reduction of your costs. So it wouldn't necessarily, because it's not in the view of earning a profit. Just like getting a rebate from your Desjardins bank account, it's non-taxable to the customer.
Peter Joseph Moredas, tax partner at FL on co-ops. Thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks, Dan.
And as we head to the end of our show, let's turn to our entrepreneur, Dardan Isufi, and ask for his one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur. Dardan, your thoughts?
I'll just put some context around this piece of advice because when we started EVA, Rafa and I were, I think I was 20 and he was like 21 or something. And we were young. I was at McGill, he was at Laval University. We didn't know much about business and whatnot. And we just started EVA a bit without really thinking of the long term. We just wanted to get some results. And we thought that building an app would take us 2 months and that building a network of drivers would take us like 2 weeks. It took us 2 years. But actually, it reminded me, like this entire journey reminded me of one quote from Mikhail Bukhanin, which is this Russian author that once wrote, that it's by seeking the impossible that we humans realize the possible. Those who are wisely limited to what seemed impossible to them never advance a single step. And, when we started EVA and we were telling people, yeah, we're here to tackle down the issue of Uber, people were kind of laughing around us. They were like, well, it's impossible. Like, how do you guys want to compete with a multi-billion company? And we realized that it always seems impossible until it's done. And we did it. And I think the advice is just do it. Just try it out and move forward. And this is how things advance. And worst case scenario, you're going to learn something, and that's it. You just need to try.
And Mike, an example of an entrepreneur team, actually, which is part political philosophy and part tech. So a really interesting combination in EVA. Congratulations, Dardan.
Well, thanks a lot.
Fascinating approach. I like the co-op model. I think it's like it certainly plays into the roots of this province. And your one piece of advice at the end kind of stuck out since it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Dan, in terms of not necessarily understanding business basics. When you think it's going to take you 2 weeks to do something and not understanding where to go. So it's I guess a lesson most entrepreneurs have learned. Some of them harder than others. So fascinating to have you on, Dardan, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. And I invite anyone listening to this to just download the EVA app on both Google Play Store and Apple Store. Thanks.
Dardan Isufi from EVA Co-op. And don't forget that you can head over to today'sentrepreneur.org for hundreds of local profiles. And you can subscribe to the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or your favorite platform. Next week, we'll be talking with Guillaume Parent from Galea. He wants to make art accessible all around the world. We'll see you then.
This has been a production of TNKR Media. Good talk.